A new investigation has opened up into the parent company of Ticketmaster. In a report by the New York Times, Live Nation, the parent company of Ticketmaster, was revealed to be being looked into by the Department of Justice for alleged antitrust violations. The company is in the spotlight after Ticketmaster systems crashed for fans trying to buy Taylor Swift concert presale tickets. Ticketmaster says it received 3.5 billion requests last week with respect to Taylor Swift. The report also says that the DOJ has recently contacted music venues and players to ask about Live Nation's operations and potential monopoly over the industry.
In 2010, Live Nation and Ticketmaster merged with approval from the DOJ. Since the merger, the company, now known as Live Nation Entertainment, has become one of the largest live entertainment businesses. And on Friday, the company put out a statement on their website in regards to the antitrust laws investigation with, quote, "As we have stated many times in the past, Live Nation takes its responsibilities under the antitrust laws seriously and does not engage in behaviors that could justify antitrust litigation, let alone orders that would require it to alter fundamental business practices." So, Robby, as a libertarian, what is the libertarian take on antitrust in this situation?
Well, look, I mean, my antitrust takes in general are probably pretty contrary to actually yours and Brianna's and probably a lot of our viewers, in that I tend to think bringing the government in to, tell businesses how to run things or break them up does not actually devolve to the benefit of customers, consumers, et cetera. That said, I've heard tons of complaints with Live Nation Ticketmaster from a lot of people. I don't go to a lot of concerts. I don't purchase tickets this way, so I personally have not dealt with this problem, but that is not to say that it isn't a problem. Did you have issues procuring your T-Swift tickets, Batya?
I was not one of the, 3 billion people, screaming at my laptop over Taylor Swift. Here's my problem with this. The DOJ is very busy, and not in any way to, besmirch or look down upon Taylor Swift's fan base. But there are monopolies in this country that are actually making things much worse for Americans in a very real way. The monopoly of meat processing plants, for example, it's like 5 huge conglomerates own all of the meat packing, all of the meat processing plants. That is hurting cattle ranchers. That is hurting the consumer. I mean, that is hurting basically every American who's struggling to pay their grocery bill. Where is the DOJ on this? The one issue that they have the time to look into happens to be, like, just to me, it's such a kind of a luxury good, a Taylor Swift ticket. So I feel a little bit confused by this. And again, it's like the Democrats telling on themselves. They're begging you to acknowledge who their new base is, right? And it's the kind of people who would go crazy over not being able to get a ticket to see Taylor Swift.
You're saying T-Swift is not a kitchen table issue, Batya? Well, and with respect to the meat packing industry, if DOJ investigated that, they'd inevitably find out, right, that it has a lot to do, I don't know the specifics, but I can imagine has a lot to do with favorable subsidies or licensing or regulations for specific firms that outside competitors would never be able to compete with, and so there's protectionism that holds up that industry. That's something I remember finding out during the baby formula shortage that, like, well, why can't we just import safe formula from Europe? And like, well, it has a different label, so we can't do that. I'm like, babies are starving because they can't get the formula, and you're worried about like a labeling issue. Like, that's how our government approaches these things. So that's in those cases.
Just to defend them on that front. I mean, I think that there was tainted baby milk brought in, I believe, actually from China. So, there it seems to me like, that kind of, you want a sort of very, very, very high standard when it comes to food you're feeding babies. But I think you're right. Obviously it didn't happen naturally that these, huge corporations managed to get a monopoly on meat packing. I'm so glad that we were able to take this story about Taylor Swift and turn it into one about, how unjust it is that, Americans can't have easier access to better meat. So congratulations on that.
Well, and before we go, isn't it interesting that, so I don't know a lot about this situation because I don't buy a lot of concert tickets, but this merger between these major firms, Ticketmaster and Live Nation, took place during the Obama years, and more it seems like a lot of specific mergers took place then in the tech sector, and were not scrutinized very much, even though ostensibly progressives were in charge. I guess if Brianna's here, she'd say Barack Obama's no real progressive, et cetera, and maybe she'd be right based on the fact that a lot of these consolidations happened with Democrats asleep at the wheel. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's another topic Glenn Greenwald is very passionate about, is the way in which the Obama administration went after journalists. And I think it just shows you that so often you look at President Obama, you look at President Trump, right? And in their demeanor and in what they represented at a very shallow level, one was the leftist progressive Democrat and the other was the conservative Republican. But if you look at so many of their policies, if you gave a list of policies for each of them, you would think that Trump was the Democrat and Obama was the Republican. I mean, just looking at things like, treatment of journalists, looking at President Obama's overseeing of, the 2008 financial crisis that resulted in this foreclosure disaster that affected millions and millions of Americans, which is something that actually Fox News has now been harping on, right? How come none of those crooks went to jail? So there's been this real scrambling of the categories of American politics. You look at what President Trump did. He released 5,000 black men from prison. He got rid of NAFTA. He enforced the border, all of which were things that you would have thought would have been on the progressive agenda. So interesting times we're living in.
Very much so. Well, we'll be back with more Rising right after this. Stay with us.